our energy, environment, and our economic systems.
Keith, you're absolutely right. These are the facts, and I think we can quickly see how they fit into our pyramid scheme theory. An average person consumes about 731,000 liters of water a year, either by drinking it or in the foods we eat. And that's even without counting our showers, car washes, or anything else we can think of. Now, put that in perspective with a world that's adding the equivalent over 8 New York cities worth of population annually, you can see the problem compounding and compounding.
The water around us here isn't what we need to be concerned about. Only about 1/3 of 1% of all the fresh water on this planet, just the fresh water, is found in rivers like this or lakes. The water that's a problem is way down beneath the surface, the aquifers. These deep wells are the lifeblood of cities across our country and entire regions of the world. And they're becoming unstable because it takes many human lifetimes to fill these aquifers.
Ken, aquifers don't get much press, but they really should. Look at the Ogallala Aquifer. It touches about 8 different states in the Midwest. It's massive. It provides drinking water for 2 million people and is primarily responsible for 30% of the water this entire country uses for irrigation. Here's where the cause for concern lies. It may be completely drained within 25 years, and it takes 6,000 years to refill. That's a great deal of cities at risk of future water shortages, to say nothing of the agricultural issues.
Guys, you've got a very similar story with Lake Mead out in Arizona. That's the lake that helps keep Phoenix supplied with water. The Scripps Institution gives Lake Mead a 50-50 chance of being dry by 2021, but the problem is actually more widespread than that. In fact, you can go back as far as 2003 and see the GAO warning that 36 states are at risk because of serious water shortages by 2013 because of this aquifer issue.
You know, water's heavy stuff. If you can imagine a box, it's a little over 3 feet long on all sides, it'd take a ton of water to fill it up. So as these aquifers get drained, it takes more and more energy to raise that water to the surface from the deeper depths. This is a very big concern in some parts of the world, much more so than the United States, which is why conflict could be a foregone conclusion with water. Half of the energy used in large parts of India now is spent extracting water from pipes that have to run from way down beneath the surface just for irrigation. China's water use over the last 100 years is a very aggressive exponential growth curve in itself, but they aren't alone. Pakistan, Mexico, the Middle East, and North Africa are all working off of borrowed time with their water supplies. Some of those places aren't exactly a model of stability. Now, here's something most people probably don't think of. Over the years, the United States has produced about 10% of the world's wheat, but we are the #1 exporter of it. Here's where water plays a really big role. It takes 1,000 tons of water to harvest 1 ton of wheat. And that water is not coming from rainfall, it's coming from irrigation. So when we are exporting wheat to countries with water issues, what we are really doing is exporting water. So if water becomes scarce in parts of the world, that will hike its value, which will hike food prices. And that will come back to hit average Americans because everything is priced on world availability, not just how much of it we have inside our borders.
Water scarcity also creates a massive energy security issue. Nuclear and coal power plants use large amounts of water to harness energy. Who's big in nuclear and coal? China. So if you can't easily get the water, you create a situation where energy becomes even costlier and water becomes more valuable than oil. In fact, half of the water consumed in the United States isn't consumed by people, but by electrical power plants.
Okay, I think we've made our case for a peak environment scenario, and that's of course tied directly to our peak energy predicament. I think we can talk about that final E now.
So let's continue to put the pieces of this pyramid scheme puzzle together. By now, you can see it's spreading out far and wide. World population took from the beginning of time until 1804 to reach 1 billion people. 208 years later, we're sitting at 7 billion. That's exponential growth. And it has had an impact on the total scope of this pyramid scheme theory. With our first E, I think the team made a compelling case that unsustainable exponential growth patterns show the days of easy energy are behind us. Looking solely at oil, we can see it's a poster child for exponential growth. Unfortunately, the process of extracting oil is becoming harder and harder because the easy stuff is no longer there. Oil's worsening ER/OEI ratio is its own example of exponential growth. Now, while there are some long-term opportunities, either the technology or infrastructure or some combination of factors isn't quite there yet for us to be able to quickly transition into a post-oil world, at least not before we feel the effects of crippling price hikes to oil. So that means we cannot continue to experience exponential growth with our energy system. That domino falling crashes into our second E, the environment. Our food consumption rates have been rising even faster than our population, and we've been fortunate for a long time to lean on technological advances to increase the productivity we've gotten from smaller and smaller amounts of farmland, from fewer and fewer farmers. But less easy energy will make it harder to feed the masses, and it certainly will make it more expensive. But expensive food and possibly American food shortages are only one part of that second E. We are seeing dangerous and unsustainable exponential growth patterns all over the environment. So what happens when you have peak energy and environment situations crash straight into an American and global economy that is dangerously fragile and on the brink of collapse? You have the makings of an unsustainable pyramid scheme. So that leads us to the final E, the economy. The team will investigate the dangers of exponential growth there next.
So guys, here we stand at the epicenter of this pyramid scheme, Congress. And I think you can trace a good portion of the roots of this massive crisis right here. In fact, it was our friends inside the Beltway who dropped the ball on our energy policy. As far as I'm concerned, they're the ones who refused to create an atmosphere that promoted innovation and the technological advances that could help us curb these exponential growth issues in our environment. And they sure as hell are prime crooks behind that top E in our pyramid scheme, the economy. You guys know this. America is the biggest economy in the world, and it's showing a similar exponential growth curve as everything else we've investigated today.
Exponential growth is a complicated idea, and when you first hear it, its role in this pyramid scheme theory may not click right away. That's why when I'm presenting my findings, it doesn't matter if I'm meeting with the United Nations or a group of Americans, I always use the same scenario to help clarify the situation, and it applies perfectly when you look at our economy. Here's an easy way to understand exponential growth. Imagine that I have a magic eyedropper, and what's magic about this eyedropper is that when I put a drop of water out, it's going to double every minute. So I put a drop in your hand, and after 1 minute you have 2 drops, and after 2 minutes you have 4 drops, and after about 6 minutes you can fill up a thimble. So now let's take this magic eyedropper, follow me, we're going to go to Yankee Stadium, and I'm going to do 2 things here. I'm going to make this park watertight, and I'm going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats. It's 12 o'clock tomorrow, you're handcuffed to the bleacher seats. I go down on the pitcher's mound, I put one of these magic drops. Here's the question. That magic drop goes down at 12 o'clock. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? Do you have minutes, days, hours? Turns out you only have 50 minutes to escape from your handcuffs before that park is completely filled with water. That's not the important question. Here's the important question. At what time is that park still 97% empty space? And how many of you realize the seriousness of your predicament? It's those last 5 minutes where most of the exponential growth kicks in, the dangers present themselves, and chaos breaks out. I strongly believe that we are well into those final 5 minutes with the 3 E's, energy, the environment, and the economy. And since they are all interconnected, the pyramid scheme will soon come crashing down. You just need to know what that means and what steps to take with your finances, investments, and day-to-day life to prepare for it. When you break it down to its simplest form, our economic system is based on an absurd scenario. John Smith goes into a bank and deposits $1,000. The bank turns around and lends $900 of it back out. So that $900 makes its way into another bank, which loans out $810 of that, and so on. Because banks can legally lend up to 90% of their deposits right back out. After a little while, that $1,000 in real money is turned into $10,000 in fake money because of it being loaned into existence. This is how banks operate, the Fed operates, every financial institution on the planet operates in the same way. And what nobody talks about is the impact this is having on our total credit market debt. In the mid-1940s, our total credit market debt sat at around $351 billion. and our GDP was $223 billion. So you had a total credit market debt that was 158% higher than GDP. That was the high mark of that ratio for about 30 years. And we had World War II to fight back then to inflate it. But around the mid-1970s, our total credit market debt began to rise rapidly. Starting in 1970, it took 7 years to double, and then another 7 to do it again, and then 5 years to double again after that. We had a little bit of a slowdown in the late 80s and 90s, and it took 10 years for the next doubling. But then it only took 8 years to double again. And it's moving much faster than our GDP is growing. Where we were sitting at a total credit market debt that was 158% larger than our GDP in the early 1940s, by 2011, that figure was 357%. Right now, it represents about $691,000 for a family of 4 in America. It's unfathomable. Now, in order for the 20 teens to economically resemble any of the past 4 decades, we might reasonably speculate that credit market debt would have to double again to over $104 trillion. What about the 2020s? Are we going to be able to maintain exponential growth for our credit market debt to hit $208 trillion?
Of course not. At least not if a dollar is still worth anything resembling a dollar in today's terms, which it won't be. It's going to take a lot of energy, a lot of environmental factors, and a lot more gambling in our economy to give us even a lottery ticket's chance of continuing this exponential growth. This pyramid scheme is completely unsustainable.
You know, not to mention while we were busy loaning money into existence, we're also printing a great deal of it, all while our debt surged to astronomical levels. You know, eventually, foreign countries are not going to trust that investing in America is a safe bet. To this point, we've been fortunate in some respects that the European crisis has made us the best-looking horse at the glue factory.
Of course, the Fed really likes to just focus on the debt that's on the books. If we look at the total net liabilities figures, you'll see we've got a much bigger problem on our hands than just our federal debt tab. And that's setting us up for a situation worse than we've seen in Greece and across Europe. This is exactly what happens when we have an economy that is built on the same model as a pyramid scheme. One that requires you to falsely believe in the sustainability of loaning money into existence.
What we're seeing with the austerity measures in Greece and the deleveraging with banks is a pattern that's going to keep recurring for the next 10 to 20 years. There's simply no way around it with all the excessive debt in this world. Plus, there's an estimated $600 trillion to $1.4 quadrillion floating around the world right now in the global derivatives market. And a good chunk of that is actually tied directly to American banks. So the unsustainability of the American and European economic systems is really quite clear and very real. These idiots inside the Washington Beltway and their cohorts in Europe do not understand the realities of this situation. But when this fiscal nightmare, this pyramid scheme they've created over the past few decades runs into these energy and environmental issues we've discussed, it is going to be bedlam. The next round of global superpowers actually know this. It's why both their governments and their private citizens are demanding more and more gold, for example. Gold is a great barometer for what the world actually thinks of our economy and our dollar. And the clear message that they are sending is that they have no faith in us for the long haul. Gentlemen, we could actually spend weeks debating and analyzing the more dangerous exponential growth patterns in our pyramid scheme theory. We've in fact just scratched the surface. But I think we should now focus on what's going to happen exactly when this pyramid scheme collapses. What that means for our futures, and more importantly, how people should go about preparing their finances and their lives for it. Because even as scary as this situation is, there are still unprecedented opportunities that are not only going to allow for protection, but immense profit potential.
As I mentioned before, much of what you've just seen has been presented to governments around the world and the United Nations. They've shared their findings